My name is Gloria Rudman. I am recently of the village in Centerville, but I lived 40 years in the village of Hyannis. Like a number of other people, they came on vacation and they loved it. And when I came again on a permanent basis, I didn't know what to expect, but I loved it even more. And there's so much about it that I don't know really where to begin. For one thing, the most important thing to me at that time, and still remains, is that it's a human-sized community. I came from a big city, my husband came from a big city, and they have wonderful attributes. But there's something about a smaller town, and this is the largest town on Cape Cod, but there's something about its sense of community, its people, and of course we're gifted with the environment. We're gifted with kettle ponds and rivers and oceans and the beautiful open sky, and for the most part, lower buildings. And that's what impressed me at the very beginning. I felt that people make a difference here. The buildings and the infrastructure does not overwhelm them in their daily lives. And that's what I've still enjoyed in all the years that I've lived here since. Well, we had been transferred to Washington, D.C. My husband was assistant director of the anesthesia department at Walter Reed Hospital because we were in the military medical army. And we had just come from Panama Canal Zone, where we lived for 4 years. And we felt that our family would stay in the Army because it had a lot of good benefits, as well as we knew that my husband would give a lot to the people that he was managing, and that it would be a complete lifestyle that was very positive for us. We wanted our children to understand the world, and we would be transferred from one area to another. We would be in Europe, we'd probably be in the Far East. We were already to Panama and Hawaii and Texas, and we enjoyed it. And so we were looking forward to that kind of a career. And we were in the Army for 9 years and expected to stay in for the full time. And then Vietnam occurred. And we were on the inside of all the information living in Washington, D.C., of what was going on, how it was being planned, the mismanagement in the planning of Vietnam, the lack of real motivation as to why we as Americans were there, and therefore the waste of a number of people. We knew also that many, many physicians were being sent there at that time without very much planning. And we decided as a family, we had 3 children at the time, we decided that we would retire from the Army. And we would do so without any benefits, and we were thinking about that too. And we felt that if we had stayed an extra year, we would have the benefits. But philosophically and practically, we didn't think it was a good idea for us as a family to do. And then when we started talking about where we wanted to live into the future, if we could possibly plan it, we both thought that the area of Cape Cod would be wonderful because it was a smaller area. It was where people seemed to interact naturally and do good things with one another. And it was a beautiful place. And so my husband went ahead and applied to Cape Cod Hospital. And the following year, there was an opening in anesthesia. And so we decided to make the big move, and that's why we're here. It was still considered a country hospital, a small country hospital, although we felt it had some very good departments. But people were still talking about any large operation, they were running to the Boston hospitals. They would not stay here. I think Harold was one of those specialists that was extremely qualified and really cared about his patients. And he helped develop the beginning intensive care unit, which he was director of for a short period of time until they actually developed the infrastructure for the intensive care ward at the hospital. And then he helped many fine anesthesiologists come to join the department and build it because they were beginning to do more surgery here. And so it was different in the perceptions of people, although we felt that it still was a very good small hospital. And of course, it has evolved over the years so that, as we all know, Cape Cod healthcare is one of the finest units that any state could have. And we're lucky because they've done so much within many, many specialties. And I won't even go into beginning that because people know. And people don't necessarily go to Boston now. They'll stay here and get excellent care. Well, when I first came, my neighbor, who was just lovely, Alfred Wilson, was very much involved in the Cape Cod Community Council and the Cape Cod Family and Children's Service, which was an agency that had started but had not done practical work yet. And I got to know him and got to know the various people in the Cape Cod Community Council. At that time, Rick Presbury was president of the Cape Cod Community Council. Bill Gick was on it, Ed Tynan, Karen McDonald, just a lot of very, very nice, good people that wanted to do good things in this town. And so I met all of them and thought, hey, they are doing a lot of good things. So when Alfred said, could you please be on our board, we need you. I had my social work background. I had a master's in social work. So I had worked in a number of family and service agencies, child guidance clinics. Even when I was in Panama, I worked part-time at the Corozal Mental Hospital there. So I never didn't work, even though working and raising children is working. It really is. I have to mention that for all of us who did that. It's very, very important to our children that we were working. But then when I joined that particular agency, I came to find a number of people from all over the Cape who were very decent and wanted to start a family and children's service, which I felt was very important for the fabric of all of Cape Cod. I had worked in that kind of an agency. I knew it was preventive. I knew that young women, young men could come to the agency at any time. You didn't have to be very sick or very troubled to come to that kind of an agency and get help on a preventive level. And because of that, problems that later became heavy, complicated problems didn't have to exist. So I felt very strongly in the philosophy of family and children's service. So when I joined the board, I realized they were trying for a few years to actually start an agency. So I got very excited about that. And I became president of the board, and then they appointed me coordinator of the project. And I developed a blueprint for a family and children's service. And then after developing that, which was all agreed to, I went out with several other people that I came to know who were in the counseling field, who were psychologists, who were psychiatrists, who were social workers, and asked them if they had any time to volunteer. because we were setting up an agency and we had to do it as a pilot project to convince the community that it would work. And would they contribute their time, because we had very little money, just hardly anything in the budget. And these people got very excited about the whole idea and said yes. And so we had a 6 to 8 month pilot project in Orleans. And we got state funding. I went to the state for the first time. All these things were all new, but I felt it was doable because of the reasoning behind it. And we had very concrete reasons why this kind of thing would go and why it would be important. So I didn't worry about presenting it, even though I didn't know the State House. I didn't know the figures in the State House, people in it. But anyway, I did it. And they started funding us, partly. And then we went to other sources. Then we, if you remember, we began going to individual towns, including Barnstable, and asked them for monies to have this type of agency survive based on the fact that it would be a pilot. And that if it didn't work, if people didn't come, if it didn't prove itself, then that would be it. It would be just a one-year funding thing. And so after a while, with a lot of planning and a lot of work, they did. The towns started giving us money. Well, that was another that was another thing. I had worked on the development of Barnstable and upgrading Barnstable, the town, as a volunteer. And I was asked if I would come back, because I was then working full-time, because my husband had died precipitously, and I had to go to work full-time after the selectmen. So they called me, these people, some of them you know, and said, would I be around to co-chair a project for the town of Barnstable. The Charter Commission had finished its work the year before, and they wanted to explain the idea further to the people in the town of Barnstable. Would I come? And I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, I think Barnstable's ready for that. Okay, so I spoke to Dexter Lean, who was my co-chair, and he was the man who was very popular in trying to improve Barnstable. Sure. And the head of a shoe store. Right. Yeah.
Right on Main Street.
Right on Main Street. And so I spoke with him, and I spoke with a few of the people, which included Meg Loughran, right, and Craig Burlingame, right, all these great people. And they said that they would help, and we would join, we would get together a large committee and start doing flyers, start talking over why it was important to try to persuade the citizens to vote for it. And so that was a 6-week project. And I felt very strongly about it, that it was time, because our town was growing so rapidly. Well, my father was born in Austria, which later, post-World War II, changed to Poland, but it was, the boundaries kept changing. And then my mother was born in a small shtetl in Russia, in the Ukraine. And their family, who had already emigrated to the United States, found each one of them in their respective families and helped them to come to the United States. They were very young. My mother was about 16, and she was the oldest of 2 sisters. And she actually, her parents had died in this small town. She had a brother that she was able to say goodbye to, who stayed there because he had a family, an older brother. But she was responsible for taking her 2 sisters across Europe to France, to the boat, to get to New York City, where the rest of her family was. Not too big a family, but lots of half-brothers and sisters, and they cared about each other. So they put them up in apartments, and they were mentors to them for a long time, and they helped them to get jobs. My mother got a job when she came in the factories there, and she was a very hard worker. So she was a forelady and was very glad about that until she got married. And at that time, you were not allowed, well, it was like, it wasn't looked upon very positively to be working outside your home. You had, you know, it was basically raising children and being a very good wife, and that was it. You were not allowed to work outside. Otherwise, it was considered that your husband couldn't support you, which was old-fashioned, but that's the kind of thing they followed. But it was a large, extended immigrant family once she came from Russia. And my father's family, my father was the baby of 8. And he came with 2 of his brothers, and he had all kinds of stories, as she did, about hiding out in pits because he was being looked for by the German army. And as a baby, he was adopted into a Catholic family because they were afraid that he would be killed unless he was placed, and they had a wonderful farm family that took him in and then allowed him to go home when he was 12. So they both came from immigrants as immigrants. So I'm and my siblings are first-generation American immigrant. And my family used to talk a lot, of course, mostly in Yiddish, Russian, German. But we picked up the Yiddish. But if they didn't want us to know what was going on, they'd talk in Russian and German, which happened very often. But we also learned that they felt, having gone through so much misery, my mother talked very realistically about pogroms. Many people don't know about pogroms in Russia, but they used to come. She would vividly tell me about being a child and watching the soldier on horseback coming in with a large scythe, a rounded blade, and would go in for no reason at all and chop people's heads off. And she saw it as a child. And she couldn't believe it, but it stayed with her for so long that she made me believe it over and over again. I was filled with these stories, and my father as well, his stories about where he grew up. And then my mother used to send care packages to all our relatives that was still there in Russia and my father's family. And then after a while, in about 1943, the packages returned, and they said, no one there, no one there, no one there. And we realized that they had all been sent to the concentration camps. So she and he lost a lot of their people, a lot of their family. I never knew my grandparents. You know, I never knew what it was like to be a grandmother. And it was very hard on them. But it was part of the culture in the United States to look more positively about what you can do with this government. And my mother and father spoke very often about freedom and what freedom means and what it's all about as we were growing up. It was like dinner table conversation. And so I think it seeped into the DNA, and it made me feel, without my realizing it, it made me feel that I have to do more than just make a life for myself and make sure that I had work to do and that I was educated, because my parents couldn't afford education. But interestingly enough, in New York City at the time, and I believe it's still available, there were 5 city colleges free. I went to Brooklyn College, and I went at night because I had to work during the day, and all I had to pay was books and the laboratory fee of $75 a semester. That was all, and I got through a good college education, enough to send me to Smith College on a fellowship after that. Smith allowed me to go through graduate school on a fellowship because of the kind of education I had gotten at Brooklyn College. So they always spoke about what you can do, and not only just for yourself. They want to make sure that we did stuff for ourselves too, to make sure that we did as well as we could in school, as well as we could at work, and go more than the mile, go more than you're asked for all the time, because you have the right to do it and you have the chance to do it. And so I always thought of that and felt like when you live in a community, it's really very important, if you can find some way to give back to that community and make it a little better because of your skill set. And everybody has a skill set. It's just that they have to find it. But that you should, that you'd feel guilty if you didn't. I think, like a lot of people must have said, my home. It's my favorite place. But I love walking anywhere, in any nook and cranny, any street. One of the fun things to do is even drive from one village to another and just see some of the roads or some of the houses, some of the plantings that are there. See how it fits with the sky. It's beautiful. I love walking Main Street. I love being in any one of our libraries. I love taking books out or whatever else there is there. Oh, I love Tumi's. Tumi's is a new place, Peruvian Italian, and I love it. And they have one particular drink that I love, and I imbibe just when I go. It's like my drink of the month, but it is wonderful with the Peruvian brandy. And the other place I love is Barboni. I really like all of them. There's so many good places to go to, and there are so many decent restaurateurs who are trying to make a good living from it, that everybody should partake of local. The first one was when the vote passed for renovations to the high school and a new middle school. The $40 million passed unanimously. That was extremely exciting to understand what you could do in a community and what the community could do for itself. It was very exciting to know where that was going to go. The second one was really truly being elected a selectman at the time. I could not say select woman. It was not allowed at the time, because I was only the third woman on the Cape to be elected. Mary Montagna was the first here, and the woman in Provincetown was the first there, the newspaper editor there. But I was also the first Jewish woman. And in a highly elected office in town, I was very, very proud. My parents were very proud. And my husband was, my children were. It was just the fact that you could participate in freedom. And that was very exciting. The third, I believe, was when the family service achieved success. I think that was a very exciting time, because I saw the people that were helped also. And they were telling us that it's so nice to have a service like this in town. So that was very. Then the fourth was when I had gotten, quite by surprise, when I had a hip operation, and it was that same year, so I used a cane, when I was appointed the Mercy Otis Warren Woman of the Year for 2010. That was a very, very exciting day. And the fifth was becoming a grandmother. That was first time. That was very, very exciting. I start crying. No, that was wonderful, wonderful, because I could see my family going on, and what a lovely child with two good parents, and then I could be part of her life. That was wonderful. My name is Gloria, and I'll include my birth family name. Gloria Wasserman, which is for the W, Rudman, and I'm very happy to be a resident of the town of Barnstable, currently in Centerville. Previously in Hyannis. I have to give Hyannis credit.